higher education is the religion of the Western world. We are so bought into this ethos, and we so feel like, you failed as a parent if your kid doesn't go to a good school, et cetera, that we don't really stop to question. So the question that a lot of people would ask me is, are you saying you'd be better off without the MBA than with? We like to pretend that we are rational creatures, and we're doing this very thorough analysis. I've done the cost benefit, but we make buying decisions with our hearts, and then we rationalize them with our heads. I was in a place of, I'd just gone through this massive setback, and you doubt yourself, you doubt things, and that's the headspace from which you're like, maybe something that I can fall back on, maybe something that is, in air quotes, proven. And so I made what is probably the worst financial decision of my life, and I invested in that MBA. And of course, all things being equal, having the experience, having the degree, having the training is better than not. Am I better off with it than I would be with the other things that I could have constructively done with that time and money?
Welcome to Visionary Voices, a podcast where we connect with forward-thinking entrepreneurs to learn from their stories. I'm your host, Ida, and today we are joined by Danny Iny. Danny is the founder and CEO of Mirasee, Inc., a company that's made it its business to simplify education and help online businesses to launch their businesses and coach lots of entrepreneurs through the process of doing that. Danny, you are the author of several books, including Leverage Learning, Teach Your Gift, Effortless, and so many others. And your take on the direction of education and how it's not working and what's supposed to be done about it, it's very interesting. So thank you for being here. It's an honor to have you.
It is an honor for me to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
So first off, I listened to your interview that you did, the presentation you did with Google, Talks at Google, and you had a very interesting story. I think it's the second time I'm hearing that story, but the way you told it was good, like how you came to that awakening of the educational system. That's what it is, like the emperor is naked. And then the second part of it being your own awakening to have that the public awakening where you can actually go and defend what it is you're saying. Has that evolved for you right now, or is that still the opinion you have and all?
It's really interesting. It's still fundamentally my opinion. I gave that talk quite a number of years ago.
Yeah, 5 years.
And one of the big developments for me is that, my kids are growing up. So I'm thinking about education in light of their experience. I still fundamentally believe that most education, especially higher education, but most education in general is designed for just a much narrower band on the bell curve than people imagine. Like people imagine that, if you're a couple of standard deviations out in either direction, it's not a good fit. I actually think unless you're like right smack dab in the middle, it's really suboptimal. So I would not be at all disappointed if my kids decide that they want to stop pursuing traditional education and do something else. But it would have to be driven by them. I wouldn't be disappointed if they decide they want to finish high school either.
That's the question I was actually going to ask. Like, would you wait for them to decide that, or would you kind of push them in a direction, like knowing that this is not quite working? Would you push them in the direction of like, I think you should go this way?
I mean, I generally don't believe in pushing my kids. I believe in supporting the inclinations they're already showing. Mm-hmm. So I had a conversation like that with one of my kids when they started grade 1, because they were like essentially coming from a place of like, kindergarten was more fun. I don't like this. So I was like, well, let's go out to a cafe. Let's get some hot chocolate. Let's talk. Mm-hmm. And I went into it kind of fully ready to be like, look, if you don't like this, there are other things that you can do. We can explore options. We have to really take ownership. But it ended up being something super trivial. I don't remember, like, I don't like the snacks. And I want to take this instead. I was like, oh, fine. Well, then we can do that.
They're probably still too young to be thinking about that level of education you're talking about, right?
Yeah. So it's very important. Like, here's the thing. Whatever environment you grow up in, you assume that's normal. So I remember I had a conversation. This will kind of just illustrate the point, but like not so long ago, maybe a year ago or something, we were talking with the kids. And I forget what they said, but it kind of implied an expectation of like, yeah, I mean, don't everyone's parents work together? Because my wife and I
Oh,
work
yeah.
together. I was like, most mommies and daddies don't work together in the same business. And my son was like, what? Like, he was shocked.
You guys are actually the exception because most couples don't work together.
Yeah, I know. It's very rare. But from his perspective, it's 100% of his sample size. So that's the expectation. So like I don't want to push, but I do want to just make sure I'm nudging to be like, this is a possibility too. Because whatever you grew up with, you just assume that's how it is for everyone.
Yeah. So there was a lady who had asked a question who was in the audience, and she talked about like kind of exactly what you're dealing with right now, where her kids were in the public education system, and she is an entrepreneur, but she's having that difficulty having the conversation with like, should you go in this direction? Should you not go in that direction? But to your point, it's more about like looking at what it is that you're great at and just pushing, well, not pushing, but guiding them to be able to see what are the possibilities out there, that it's not usually this traditional higher education, higher learning stuff, but it's more like go in whatever direction that, like, don't go the traditional route, just have the open mind to go in any direction.
I'm not opposed to the traditional route in the sense that I think it's like the worst route. I just don't think it's any better than many of the other routes that are available. And so, for most people, it's probably suboptimal because, it's not that there's one path that everyone should take. I don't think everyone should start a business or everyone should, whatever. I just think there are a lot of different paths and everyone's got to find the right one for them. Mm-hmm. And so just like starting a business is not the right step for everyone, I don't think the traditional path is the right step for everyone either. So I just want people to explore and find their own thing. And I think the most important thing is that the exploration, the decision be self-directed, right? I would rather they learn to explore and own the decision, regardless of what decision they make, mm-hmm. over any decision that I drive them towards. I think that will serve them less in the long run.
Yeah, that makes sense. So thinking to your own story, when you were around 15 years old, from what you said, there was this switch from being this A student, teacher's pet type student in class to being like, okay, this is not working for me anymore. And then mm-hmm. you moved from that and then you started exploring. What was your first business that you created?
So it's really interesting because it didn't occur to me that I was like an entrepreneur or I was starting businesses. It really felt more like, I'm doing this project. Mm-hmm. So in hindsight, the first business that I started is when I was, 12 years old. And the context there is that, I was in school. I was in high school at the time. And my parents would give me $2 to get lunch at the cafeteria. Mm-hmm. And there were different options at the cafeteria. And $2 could get you a fine lunch. But the option I really liked was $3. And I wanted to get that lunch, but I couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
And I noticed something. My friend would go every day and he would buy a Coke for $1. And I was like, that's interesting. He doesn't like Coke. So like, what's going on, right? But I knew that he liked cream soda and they didn't have cream soda at the cafeteria. So I figured out that I could go to Costco and I could get a tray of, cans of cream soda for very little. And I could bring it to school and I can give it to my friend. He'd give me the $1 that he was going to give to the cafeteria to get something he didn't want anyway. And then I have $3 and then I can buy the thing that I actually wanted to eat.
Whoa.
So that was my first business. It generated $5 of weekly profit and it operated until I moved away at the end of the year. So that was my first business.
You were 12 years old?
I was 12 years old.
Was that even allowed? As in, because I think a lot of schools wouldn't even let you sell things in them, right? But the entrepreneur in you is like, no, I have a problem. I think I can find a solution and I'm just going to go with it.
Well, it's win-win for everyone, right? Like other people were like, well, why don't you? He's your friend. You should just give it to him for free. I'm like, he's spending this money anyway. He's getting something he doesn't want. I'm not coercing him into this.
You're going to make him spend the money and get what he wants. Problem solved.
Exactly. And that's really what entrepreneurship fundamentally is. It's just finding, I see a way that things could be working better for everyone.
Yeah. So when you left that institution then and you went on your own from the time you were 15 to like maybe like 10 years later where you were exploring things, what did you work on?
A lot of things. So when I first quit school, I was like, I'm going to do something constructive with my time. What can I do? I'm 15. I don't have a lot of marketable skills. But I knew HTML. And so anyone who's listening to this who knows anything about technology knows that that basically means I knew nothing. Right? HTML is very simple.
Wait, I was about to be very impressed. Like, okay.
No, HTML is like, it's a markup language. It's a very simple language for creating web pages. It's basically, if you want text to be bold, then you write like open brackets, B, close bracket. It's very simple.
Yeah.
Right? It's not, there's no complicated logic. You're not writing programming or anything. It's very simple.
Okay.
But I knew how to build very simple rudimentary web pages. And I figured, okay, so I'll do that. I'll start a business building web pages for businesses. So I went door to door to all the shops in my neighborhood and I asked them, hey, do you need a website?
Wow.
And this is how young and like just oblivious I was. It didn't even occur to me that the clerk at the counter is not the person who makes that decision. Right? So that went nowhere. I didn't get any business at all. And then one day I'm sitting at home with, or rather at a friend's house, we're playing some educational game with his little sister. And he points at the screen. He says, Danny, this is pretty simple. I'll bet you could build a game like this. And I tell him, I'll bet I could. Mm-hmm. Now, as an aside, I had none of the requisite skills. So I probably could not have. But I was like, sure, how hard can it be?
Yeah.
Right? So we find the box. This is back when, software was sold in boxes that come in shrink wrap.
Yeah.
So I find the box. I call up the company. I get a meeting with the CEO. This is one of those things that in hindsight, I'm like, how in the hell did I do that? Mm-hmm. But at the time, it just didn't even occur to me that this was a big deal. So it literally didn't register. I guess I called them and made the appointment. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I go in there. I'm 15 years old. I sit down with the CEO. I shake his hand. I tell him, I have a business proposition for you. I think I can build the games that you sell.
Could you?
No. But I figured I could figure it out.
Okay.
But it continues, right? So my mom has a degree in psychology. So I tell him I've conferred with a psychologist. And I've come to the conclusion that if you really want kids to learn, they should be having fun, and the learning happens in the background. They shouldn't be doing, math exercises on the screen.
Well, that's true. Uh-huh.
It is true. Now, what he could have said was, no kidding, I've been doing this for 10 years, get out of my office. Mm-hmm. But instead of that, he says, okay, he opens a drawer, he pulls out a document, he blows on it, and like a cloud of dust flies off it. He says, this is a script that I wrote for a game 8 years ago. Why don't you build it and we'll sell it? And I say, that sounds great.
Okay.
And he says, so how are you going to build it? And I had no technical skills, but I had a friend who knew Visual Basic, so I knew of Visual Basic. I thought my friend might teach me. I said, I'll build it in Visual Basic. And he says, isn't that like reinventing the wheel? Why don't you build it in Director?
Okay.
So I tell him, look, if we're going to be working together, then of course I have to adapt to your business practices. So no problem. I'll build it in Director. So we shook hands. He drew up, some boilerplate LOI or something that we signed. I walk home. I open up Google, which was brand new, and I type in, what is Director?
You're pretty much winging everything right there.
Yep. And I feel like so here's the thing. There are people who, when they're asked the question, can you do this? They think what you're being asked is for an assessment of your current capabilities. There are other people who, when asked, can you do this? They feel like what you're asking for is how plausible it is that you could acquire the skills in the time frame required. Okay. And I think that's how entrepreneurs think about this.
True.
So it doesn't matter if I can do it right now. It matters if I can plausibly figure out how to do it by the time I'd need to.
Yeah, which is about being resourceful. Yeah. So you walk out of there. You go find out what is Director, and then what? You built it?
I started building it, and I worked on this game on and off, because still I was 15. Not the world's best work ethic. I worked on this game on and off for 2.5 years. At some point along the way, I kind of look at it like, and I'm learning as I go, right? I'm actually developing skills. So like kind of a third of the way, and I actually have some skills. And I look at this, I'm like, okay, I've done a terrible job. I have to start fresh and start over. So I reboot, I start over, and I go through this whole process. And at the end of 2.5 years, I look at the game, which is working, and I take a step back and I'm like, this game is terrible. The script was awful.
Oh.
So this game never saw the shelves. But honestly, I'm super grateful for the opportunity. This was like my introduction to working in that industry.
Yeah.
And they did hire me for a bunch of, like, as I developed actual skills, they hired me for a bunch of freelance stuff that they did pay me for. So this was a wonderful opportunity. And I continue to be grateful to the guy who gave it to me.
Yeah. Oh my God. Okay. So that script was not good. You figured that out like 3.5 years down the road. Did you then create one yourself that you started building out? Or no, it was like, okay, this project is done.
Well, that project was done, but I actually did start my first big attempt at like a startup company was in the educational gaming space. I was building a game about Leonardo da Vinci that teaches kids how to read. And it's kind of what felt like the next step for me coming off of that project.
Okay.
And that's something I worked on. There was a break because when I was 18, I was drafted into the Army. So I wasn't really working on much during that time. But from when I was 21, for the next 4 or 5 years, like that's the project that I was working on.
Okay. Is this the project that ended up, you loved it, people loved it, but parents and teachers that it was supposed to help actually did not like it?
Yes, that is correct.
What's the reason?
They didn't like it. Is they didn't get it.
What didn't they get?
They didn't get it. They were like, it didn't click for them. Right. And, you know, I was talking to a student earlier today, and I was telling them how they like, this is a lesson I learned from that experience. You really have to validate that the market wants what you are selling. And the student says, no, but it's so good. It solves so many problems. They're going to have to want it. Mm-hmm. And what it brought to mind for me is, I remember when I was a kid, I heard this thing about how some, I guess, physicist or engineer or something did this analysis and determined that according to the laws of physics, bumblebees shouldn't be able to fly.
Right.
And I always found that funny because, like, clearly they do. So there's something wrong with the analysis.
There's something wrong with the physics.
Yes. So in the same way, it's like, it doesn't matter how much you think they should get it. Right? They either want it or they don't, right? Marketing and business are very democratic in that way. You can't impose things on other people. You cater to the needs and desires that they have.
Yeah.
So they didn't get it. It didn't click for them for whatever reason. They didn't see it as something that was important or valuable, or they didn't understand what it was like. It doesn't matter, but it didn't click. So, and they were the customer. So there was no market.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Okay. So how long did this take?
I mean, I worked on this project. I started kind of incrementally a little bit when I was 21 or 22 and like getting more and more invested, more serious. In 2007, so I would have been 24, is when I got a lot more serious about it. I started entering like business plan competitions. I won some, I raised some money, a little bit of prize money, a lot more in like loans and friends and family and stuff like that. I hired a bunch of people. And we had some good traction, right? Like you were saying, the experts loved it, the kids loved it. I was very young, very inexperienced in what in hindsight is a very complicated industry. Mm-hmm. And we were bleeding money, right? This was, this was the first, like, my rent at the time was $585 a month. And all of a sudden I'm spending like tens of thousands of dollars a month in payroll. Right. So suddenly I'm in this position, like you fall asleep at the wheel and you've lost like 20 grand.
Wow.
Right? So it was a wonderful learning experience that ended up in a total crater. It all fell apart. I didn't want to tell my investors, who were friends and family, that their money was gone. So I took the losses on personally. And I walked away from that with $250,000 in personal debt. And that was like 2008-ish, 2009 kind of thing.
Before the financial crisis?
I would have been 25 or 26.
Before the financial crisis?
Well, it was right around the financial crisis, right? Like I figured out, we're bleeding money. It's running dry. I figure out how I need to change the plan. I rework the business model. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to hit the pavement to raise more money. And then it was September 2008. The markets crashed. And there was like no money.
So the business, that project, that was the end of it at the time.
Yep.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Okay. So was that the time when you decided to say, okay, let me go and get an MBA? Maybe I'm missing something. What was that even a thought? Like maybe I'm missing something that I need to have? Or why did you go get an MBA at the time?
I mean, that's around when it was. And yes, but it's, you make it sound much more analytical and rational than it probably was.
Okay.
So we like to pretend that we are rational creatures and we're doing this very thorough analysis. I've done the cost benefit, but we make buying decisions with our hearts and then we rationalize them with our heads.
True.
Right. And, in hindsight, really, I was in a place of, I'd just gone through this massive setback and you doubt yourself, you doubt things. And that's the headspace from which you're like, maybe something that I can fall back on, maybe something that is, in air quotes, proven. Right. And, of course, you go through the process, you put the feelers out. And what actually prompted me to look in the first place is that while building my business, I've been invited to do some guest speaking to different business school classes. And one of the professors, I think he was like the coordinator of the department or something, he said, you're really good at this. If you get an MBA, I'd love for you to come teach at the business school. And I love teaching. I'm a teacher in my personality. I'm still basically a teacher.
Yeah.
I teach through my business and I teach on my own terms and it's all good. But I was like, all right, I'll explore this. And you go through the process and essentially you don't realize this. You think like you're applying to them, but they're trying to make a sale for, whatever many, many tens of thousands of dollars of tuition that it is.
Yeah.
So you're a prospect, but you jump through some hoops and then they flatter you and like, you've been accepted if you want, like it makes you feel good, especially when you're in this place of insecurity. And so I made what is probably the worst financial decision of my life. And I invested in that MBA. And I went through the process and I got my MBA, which I think is a degree that has so little value. And it's not that it was a bad school. It's one of the top schools in Canada. It's just, it is if I wanted to be a middle manager at a bank or insurance company, then it would have been the perfect preparation for doing that.
Right.
But those were not my ambitions.
Yeah, I heard you talk about it, and you said the MBA or the education you did at the time was in hindsight, it's like the worst possible investment. What was financial investment you've done so far? And people are like, would you be better off without the education? And you say, no, it's not a binary. It's not better off without the education. It's like, what was the opportunity cost of going to school? Like, what would I have been able to do if I didn't spend that time and money at the time?
Well, that's exactly it, right?
Yeah.
Like people and higher education is like, honestly, it is the religion of the Western world.
Yeah.
Right. We are so bought into this ethos and we so feel like, you failed as a parent if your kid doesn't go to a good school, et cetera, that we don't really stop to question. So the question that a lot of people would ask me is, are you saying you'd be better off without the MBA than with? And of course, all things being equal, having the experience, having the degree, having the training is better than not. But all things are not equal, because in the not scenario, I would have close to $100,000 back and I could have spent like more than a year of my life doing other things. So am I better off with it than I would be with the other things that I could have constructively done with that time and money? No, I'm absolutely not.
Or better yet, we don't know.
No, I can say with confidence. I'm not.
Okay, why are you so confident in saying that?
Because, now I'm more than like 15 years later, and I have a much broader sense of what is the wide array of things that I could do with that amount of time and with that amount of money. There's no way that it was a good investment. Like, here's the thing. I think that is true of most people, except most people don't want to take the personal ownership or be self-starters in doing that exploration of what can I do and how can I drive my development. And essentially, that amount of time and that amount of money is a very heavy tax that you pay for the decision not to be a self-starter.
And at the time, were there people that you could look up to say this person didn't go to university, or this person didn't do this follow this path of education, and look how successful they are? Did you have those people you could look up to at the time?
I mean, there weren't as many, and it's sorry. Let me say that differently. I'm sure there were many of those people in the world, but our circles tend to be very small.
Okay.
Right? How many people do you really go to for guidance? You go to your parents, you go to your, aunts and uncles, and when they give you advice, they're not giving you advice from their thorough, objective survey of the marketplace and landscape. They're giving you advice from their impressions, which is formed by their experiences and what they've been told. There's a lot of commitment and consistency bias. Right? We don't want to, it's hard to do that objective analysis. Not that they couldn't, but, they didn't. I didn't ask them to, right? Like they gave the best advice off the top of their head that that was their picture of the world. And, the only person who made a mistake is me. I'm the one who didn't, I could have asked better questions. Okay. I could have dug into, what informs that advice? What makes you think that is true? What are the assumptions? And I didn't. And I don't, here's the thing. I don't believe in regrets. I wouldn't be sitting here probably today in front of you if I hadn't gone through all that.
Yeah.
But it's not because of, it's in spite of, right? In the sense that, I was so horrified by what a terrible investment it was. I was like, there's got to be a better way to do things.
You got to make something out of this.
Yeah. And I did, and I'm very happy with what I built. That's kind of like someone, if the super size me guy is like, wow, I can't believe how bad McDonald's is. I should start a healthy food chain restaurant. Then he builds it up and he's like super successful. It's like, okay, great. But he may not regret having eaten nothing but McDonald's for a month. That doesn't mean that you can credit that with his success.
Right. Well, that makes sense. Okay, so coming from there now to what you're doing right now, all of those, to your point, everything that you went through created the person that you are right now. Those steps and missteps and all the learnings along the way informed the decision of you now creating all your businesses right up to what Mirasee is right now, which it's multiple millions of dollars in revenues annually, and you are on a mission to support a global community, helping like hundreds of thousands of people in the entrepreneurial space. Let's talk about that right now. What problem is Mirasee solving, or what problem are you solving right now?
Sure. So fundamentally, I believe that we all have gifts, right? We have talents, we have skills, we have experiences that position us to help other people with things in their lives. And I believe that everyone has a responsibility to monetize those gifts. And I want to unpack that because I choose the words monetize and responsibility with intentionality, right? So when I say monetize, people are like, well, why responsibility? I mean, it would be good to monetize. I'd make money. That's something I should want. But why responsibility? And you've got to really understand, what does it mean to monetize your gift? And to understand what monetize is, you want to think about what's the opposite. And people imagine that the opposite of monetized is free. But that's not the case. The opposite of monetized is fallow, right? As in unused, as in not contributing to the world.
Okay.
Right. If you think about Uber or Airbnb, what they're in the business of is monetizing fallow assets. You've got your car that you're not using a bunch of the time. You've got this apartment that you're not using a bunch of the time. Free would be you just leave the car, the keys in the ignition, put a little thing on the door on the door saying anyone who wants, go ahead. You're more than welcome. That would be free.
That's a great distinction.
You're not going to do that.
Yeah.
Likewise with the apartment, right? There's only, you might give away, let friends stay in your apartment for free if they're in town for the weekend or something. There's a limit to how much you can do that. And the same is true of your gifts. You might give advice or guidance to someone for free here and there, but there's a very low ceiling on how much you can do that if you've got to spend your day paying your bills in some other way. So monetizing your gift is basically about creating a structure that allows you to sustainably share that gift with the people who need it with all of your energy and effort.
Okay.
And it's great for you too, because you do make money in the process. But it's the opposite of monetized is not free. It's fallow. And letting your gifts lie fallow that would be a shame.
Wow. I never thought about that. But the way you put it, I mean, Uber is a great business. Uber and what's the other one you called? Airbnb. Those are both great businesses, and they didn't create any new assets. They just used whatever was already existing there. And so for you to explain it in that way, it makes a lot of sense. And so every single one of us has that gift that's just sitting there, not being used. And your process is to then help bring that out, help you to teach it and monetize it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And that's it. That's 100% of what I do.
What would be your favorite transformation story you've seen so far with all the clients you've worked with?
So this one goes back a ways. So I work with, to be more tangible, I work with coaches, consultants, expertise-based entrepreneurs for the most part. And I teach them how to grow their businesses through online courses, but implicitly I teach business skills, right? I want to empower people to better understand how to think about their business. And we ran this little course many years ago about business model fundamentals. And I remember distinctly someone in the program, this was so long ago, let's see if I can remember the specifics. But she posts this question in the forum. And she says, so here's my situation. I make purses out of leather that I sell, and I have to buy the leather in lots of 10 units. Is that a gross margin problem, or is that an operating model problem, right? That I essentially have my money tied up in leather. And she prefaces this by basically saying, I don't know anything about business, but here's my question.
Okay.
And I'm like, that's a very sophisticated question for someone who doesn't know anything about business, right? I can remember people I did my MBA with who would not be able to ask that question with that level of sophistication. What was even better is someone else replies, she says, well, I don't know anything about business either, but it would seem to me that that's a working capital problem.
But you're not talking about business, they don't know anything.
And so maybe you can pool with other people who make leather and divide it up, or maybe you can negotiate better payment terms with the person selling you the leather. And I was just so proud to see that, right? From this exchange from two people who don't know anything about business, and yet
good,
so impressive.
So
I can tell a ton of stories. There are people who came to us and brink of bankruptcy, and they built 7-figure businesses and impacted ton. But I've got lots of those stories. But this really drives home why I get excited about doing what I'm doing, because it gives people the tools to have a deeper insight into their situation and the opportunities that are in front of them.
Expand on that.
Well, so what is business about? If you ask that question, a lot of people will tell you that, it's about making money.
It's about solving a problem and getting paid for it.
I'd go broader. I think it's about sustainably getting done what you want to see done in the world. And profitability is part of sustainability. If it's not profitable, you're losing money. You can't keep on doing it, right?
True.
But it's about sustainably making the impact you want to see in the world. And what stands in the way of being able to do that is generally business skill, right? I mean, something that I do from time to time, if I'm feeling a little down, I need some inspiration, is I'll open up TED.com and I'll start watching videos. And, if I'm feeling really down, then I'll watch them on double speed. So I'm machine gunning the inspiration. But you do that for a few hours. And then you're like, okay, it's enough. I'm so inspired. So you close your laptop, you go out into the world, you look around, you blink because it's bright and you're staring at the screen. And you think about all these wonderful things that you just saw videos about how we know how to do. And you look in the world and you're like, where the F is all of it?
It's not
Like,
getting done. Yeah.
why does the world not look as great as all these things we ostensibly know how to do would suggest it could be? And that gap between what the world could be and what it actually is, that's business. That's the skills of business, the skills of making things happen and making them real, scalably and sustainably.
Oh, wow. Okay. You just give me a lot of things to think about right now. It is so true. Because there is a gap, and that is what education is all about. And that is what business is. It's taking those ideas. You could think it, you can build it, but no, you think it, someone has to teach you how to build it, or you can teach yourself how to build it. But it's that, yeah. How can the audience be of support to what you do?
Well, if what I'm saying is resonant, they're welcome to check out my work in whatever modality works for them. So they can go to my website, Mirasee, mirasee.com, and we've got lots of free resources and information. If you search my name, Danny Iny, on Amazon, I've written several books. There's quite a few. And I will presume that everyone listening to this is a podcast listener. So if you search for Mirasee FM, you will find that we publish, 12, 15, 17, I've lost count, but a whole bunch of podcasts on our network that, just grab whatever feels interesting and resonant.
And I'm going to include all the links on how people can find your books or your podcast or Amazon. I'm going to include all of those links in the podcast description. Thank you. Thank you for spending the time with us. We like going deeper with entrepreneurs to hear from their stories, learn from their stories, because something you share definitely resonates with me. It's definitely going to resonate with the people who are listening to this. And maybe that could just be, we never know which of the stories is going to be that light bulb moment for someone to be like, hey, I connect with that. And I think that's the message I needed to hear today to go out and be what I'm meant to be. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And thank you for the invitation and the opportunity. I consider it a privilege to be here. And I hope it was valuable for whoever's listening.
For more insightful conversations with entrepreneurs, check out this video right here. I think you'll love it. Continue to enjoy, and I'll see you there.